Ahoy, it's a boy. Today is September 3rd, the cusp of Labor Day, and while the weekend has been pretty lame, if I'm being honest, I really haven't done much of anything. I'm kind of happy that we get 3 days off. So, you know, I was sort of, I'm sort of sitting here thinking, this morning I had a lot on my mind, and living alone, I have plenty of time to just sort of talk to myself, which is something that I do frequently. And I was doing a lot of it this morning, and I had this thought across my mind. It's like, hey, you should just sit down, fire up the microphone, and start recording some of this stuff. And I didn't. I don't know what I did, but now that I'm sitting here, I was literally thinking, hey, see if you can recall some of that stuff you were talking about. And I have no idea what I was talking about. So we'll kind of see where things take us. We just finished our first full week of classes at school, and I'm very quickly approaching my last day of work, and I gotta be honest. I don't know. This is probably a good thing, but today it feels a little uncomfortable, which is, I don't know if it's a confidence crisis or just being on the cusp of this big change where my availability is about to open up. And I'm just really thinking about how I want to spend my time, which is really just a sort of microcosm of a much larger issue, which is like, how do I want to spend the rest of my life? My time with a capital T. How do I want to spend my time on this planet? And, I think when I decided I was going to put in my time at work, I was kind of faced with, and it's nothing personal. It just is the case that I was at my job for a long time. I kind of did all the personal and professional growth and development I was going to get there. And so for a long time, it was just a job of convenience, although the work was very important to me and I enjoyed a lot of the people that I worked with. It was just like being in a relationship for too long. It's no one's fault. It just, what do they say? The only constant is change. And, it was a changing of the seasons. And, I probably said it in previous episodes, but although I could have stayed in that job, sometimes I think it's a bit of an act of courage, whether it is a relationship or a job. Just kind of, even though you're not sure what the next thing is going to be, you kind of have to make room in your life for that thing to show up. And if you just kind of keep doing what you're doing, you're just never going to have the opportunity to see what that thing is. So you kind of take the plunge, and, the in-between period can be a little unsettling. But sure enough, I don't know, you land somewhere. And I think I'm kind of seeing where else that applies in my life. I mean, since coming back from Taiwan, I had sort of decided while I was there, and it's kind of been in my mind that I was going to apply for a Fulbright scholarship. And while that is great, and I'm not necessarily against that, I have to be honest and say that the graduate program I'm thinking of applying to, although it's at a great school, it's like the number it's like the number 2 university in Taiwan, and I would be studying Chinese. I kind of really don't like the location. It's all the way on, if I can think of a compass, it's on the west side of the island. It's really far from Taipei, which is where I spent most of my time this summer. And, although it ticks a lot of boxes, like, hey, Fulbright, very prestigious. This college, very, very prestigious. It would be very impressive on a resume. I'm also thinking, yeah, but do you really want to spend 2 years there? Especially if you're not entirely sure where it's going to lead you. I mean, if I was 100% sure what I wanted at the end of that program, and I was confident that that was going to be the vehicle that got me there, I mean, that's one thing. But if it's just going to be a 2-year investment for a diploma or, I don't know, bragging rights or something like that. I mean, of course, my Chinese would improve. That would be great. But that can really happen anywhere. And if that's really the goal, right, if the goal is just to be in Taiwan and have language improvement, there's other ways to do that. And so I guess what I'm saying is I've had this sort of pressure hanging over me, which is, but before I apply to anywhere else, the deadline for the Fulbright scholarship is coming up quickly. And not only does that mean that I have to do quite a bit of work in terms of like writing a mission statement and, some essays and that sort of stuff, I also have to conscript the help of like 3 different people to like write me a letter of recommendation. And it's, the challenge there is it's not just a letter of recommendation. It's a letter of recommendation that speaks very specifically to the aims of what you hope to accomplish with the Fulbright scholarship. So, I've written letters of recommendation for people, and, you never want to condemn someone by faint praise, but there's also a way in which, they kind of write themselves sometimes. Or I've even done this where I've actually asked other people to write them. The person who's seeking a letter of recommendation from me, I'll just be like, hey, why don't you write it? And then I'll take it and morph it into my words. But, at the end of the day, they kind of know what points I need to hit to get into the institution that they're wanting to get into. So I sort of trust their judgment about that. And I don't know, maybe that sounds weird. I don't have too many qualms about it. But the point is that this Fulbright scholarship would require, a significant investment, asking for a significant investment on the part of other people. And if I'm not entirely sure, but something I even want to do, I just feel a little guilty about asking for their time. I mean, moreover, I have to find someone to evaluate my language skills. And, although I have people in mind for all of these tasks, it just was and is starting to feel like, I don't think this Fulbright scholarship is going anywhere. And maybe now is not the time to sort of apply for that. Maybe the smart move is to, and maybe I haven't said this, but I did apply to 2 different language schools to be in Taipei again in the spring once I graduate, and I got accepted to both. They're both 3-month placements. One starts at the end of February, one starts at the beginning of March, and I'm still kind of weighing my options. There's no rush to make a decision. But so I'll definitely be back in Taiwan in the spring. And so maybe I'm thinking we'll just go for another 3 months, see if lightning can strike twice. I mean, if I go back for 3 months and I decide I really do like it, it might be too late to apply for graduate school in the fall, but maybe, I don't know, maybe spring is an option, or maybe you do just wait a year. But the point is just kind of knowing for sure that you want to go, I don't know if I mentioned this, but I do have a friend who's who I met while I was in Taiwan, who's actually from Vietnam. They were not a member of the program that I participated in. Actually, they were one of the people. I probably mentioned that I went on a crap ton of dates while I was in Taiwan. This was one of the people that I went on a date with, and although I don't think that there's probably not the prospect of a romantic relationship, I keep in touch with them, and we're very friendly, and I still enjoy the kind of cultural and language exchange. But this person is actually from Vietnam. They're also studying Mandarin, and they had visited Taiwan, loved it, wanted to move there, found a job. They've been there for I think a couple of years now. And honestly, they're really not happy there. And so, I think that could be the job that they're in. But, yeah, I don't know. I guess I'm just feeling like, something about just sort of, getting other people involved and investing this time in this application process that I wasn't even sure about myself, just, didn't really feel like the right thing to do. Although I have to say I had a bit of I don't know what you call it. It was kind of an unexpected, actually it turned out to be kind of an unexpected break, but on Friday morning, which is a very easy day for me class-wise, I just have one class. I was sort of leaving for school, and as I walked out to my bike, I saw that my rear tire was flat, and I was like, God damn it. Because although I give myself enough time to kind of get things done, there's not a lot of room for error. So, there's just no way in hell I was going to be able to change the tire in time. And I tried getting a ride from Lyft, the car share app. And I've never had this happen before. But it basically told me, like, yeah, no one's available to take you. Try again later. And I was like, Jesus fucking Christ. I've never encountered this on any rideshare app ever, especially where I live in the Bay Area. It's like car share central over here. And so, I just had to email the teacher and was like, hey, I'm really sorry, but I got a flat tire, and, Lyft is telling me they can't give me a ride. If I'm not able to leave here in like the next 10 minutes, it's really not going to be worth me. I worded it a little more diplomatically, but it's basically not going to be worth me like making the trek to school, right? If I arrive for the last 15 minutes of lecture, I mean, maybe I'll just save myself the trip. So I didn't end up going. And yeah, why did I mention that? Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's just yeah, maybe in a weird way, it was sitting with me because I was feeling like because I'm about to depart from work and because I will just be focusing on my studies. I guess especially in courses related to my major, this was one of them. This was my Buddhism in China class. Although I'm not too enthused on the topic, it's relevant to my major, and I just kind of want to hit those things out of a park. So I guess it felt like kind of I don't know. I was going to say embarrassing. That's probably too heavy-handed, but it kind of felt like an embarrassing way to start the semester. Yeah, but what I ended up doing is in the last iteration of this sort of personal journal, I probably spent a lot of time talking about synthesis. And I was actually doing a fair amount of that before I left for Taiwan. And I was really, since returning to school, I really haven't picked up my guitars. I looked to my right here. I have 2 guitars here that are just kind of sitting dormant. And people ask me, and when they do, people who've known me for a long time, who know that music was a big part of my life for a long time, if I haven't seen them for a while and they ask me like, hey, are you still doing music? And I say no, they often have a kind of almost a sad response. Not that they have a vested interest in what I'm doing, but I think because it was such a big part of who I was, they almost feel like they're sad for me in a way. Like maybe they're probably just anticipating that I might feel sad about it or that I might feel a certain type of way. But for me, it's nothing like that. I just, there was a period of my life where all I did was think about songs and songs I was writing. And, I feel like I'm actually paraphrasing something that I heard Bob Dylan say in like the documentary No Direction Home or something like that, which is great. You should watch it if you haven't seen it. Actually, Don't Look Back for me is the best Bob Dylan documentary, but No Direction Home is also very good. But like there was really a time in my life, when I was sort of working at bars and restaurants where, I wasn't too social. I was kind of going to work, and I was just kind of coming home and writing music all the time. And I was just kind of, it was like I would be going to work, and as I was walking there, I would just be thinking about some lyrics I was working on or some couplet that I was trying to figure out for a song I was working on. And I would also record every step of the songwriting process for me. So if I added for some people, they can sit down and crank out a song. For me, a song would take, a couple of weeks and many, many hours. And sometimes mostly out of a single songwriting session, I would really only get like a couplet of a verse. I would get half a verse out of a couple hours of work. But every time I made progress or kind of moved the ball down the field, I would record what I had up until that point. And so by the time I finished writing a song, I would have like 12 different, partial recordings of this song that was kind of coming together. But as I was sort of marinating in a song, I would like just listen to what I had so far. And I would just kind of go over the melody over and over and over again. And it was this thing I was just kind of possessed by, And of course, I had to turn to things throughout the day, whether I was working or not. But anytime I had some downtime or a moment to just kind of get lost in my thoughts, I would be thinking about these songs, And it wasn't just writing the songs or completing the songs or whatever. It was also the lens that I kind of experienced the world through. Anytime I had an experience that kind of stood out to me or felt formative or it was just like I was reading my whole life like a bar rag, just trying to get content for songs out of it. And, that was like my creative mechanism is the word I'm thinking of. And, towards the end of my time, like doing music, I really started to feel that kind of slowing down a little bit. And, now it's like the minute I decided that I was going back to school, I picked up my guitar a little bit and sometimes I pluck around or I'll record something that sounds like it might be a song idea, but I don't have any of that. And I don't have any of those thoughts. I'm sure I could sit down and crank out a song by brute force, but I don't have any songs in me. You know what I mean? I used to just use my dictaphone. That's a bad place to start on a word. I used my dictaphone to record song ideas as they came to me. And I just had this repository of just hundreds of song ideas. And anytime I finished one song, if I didn't know what the next one would be, I would just randomly go through that dictaphone and just see what stood out to me and just start working on it. And the sense was, the thing I had to kind of reconcile myself to, because my process was so slow, is that there was just never going to be enough time to write all the songs. But if I was diligent, there would always be something that I could work on. And that current is just non-existent anymore. And that now, of course, as I say that, that sounds sad, right? Because in a way, I'm kind of waxing poetic or romanticizing this one chapter of my life. But I think the point I'm really trying to make, which now that I'm thinking about it, is tangential to something else. But I'm in a different chapter of my life, and I'm totally okay with that. That's just the way it is. My sort of mind and my experience is sort of filled up with other things. And of course, there's this always unspoken, I do have this creative project, this idea that I've been marinating on for a long time that is not being attended to. And in a way, I'm actually like totally preoccupied with that. I mean, even my academic interests and my academic studies are really just, are sort of a smokescreen for this creative project that I've sort of been sitting on for a long time. But why am I talking about that? Why am I talking about this? I was talking about school. I was talking about being in a different chapter of my life. And I was going to talk about my disconnection from music as related to something else. It was actually a way to back into another thought, which I have no idea. Oh, I was talking about music. I was talking about what I was doing before the summer. And yes, so while songwriting is not a thing that I really do anymore, one thing I was doing, I've sort of done intermittently since returning to school, is making a little bit of music, or at least scratching that itch in different ways. And one of those has been synthesizers, and just kind of learning about synthesizers and how they operate. And there's this great piece of software that I highly recommend called Syntorial, which will teach you about synthesis if that's something that you're interested in. You can certainly just get a software synthesizer or a hardware synthesizer and start mucking around. And on YouTube, there are tons of tutorials and all that sort of stuff. But if you're like me, I'm kind of an academic person. I really like a syllabus or a structure. I like to feel like I'm sort of working through something. I like to have a guide, in a way, just to make sure I'm kind of doing the quote right thing. I mean, no matter whether it's classical music or Russian literature or anything, if I get into something, I create a syllabus for myself. When I got into Russian literature and I just decided in a moment, hey, you're just going to read a shit ton of Russian literature, it's like I create a syllabus. Who are the major authors? What what are their dates, so that I can read them kind of chronologically, and also not just their lives, but what are their major works, and then in what order were those written. And I just kind of go through the list, so when it, I mean, I guess thinking of Russian literature, it was like reading Pushkin, and then after that it was like Gogol, and then after that my Lermontov, and then after that it was like Dostoevsky or something like that. I don't know the order perfectly. Turgenev's in there somewhere. But that's just kind of the way I work. And so I kind of muck around with something. But when I'm all in, I'm all in. And yeah, I guess I was trying to say with synthesis, I started mucking around. And I thought, oh, this could be interesting. But I wanted to learn. So I used this software program called Syntorial, which teaches you about all the different parts of a synthesizer, and also is really kind of based on ear training. So I highly recommend that. I've done that. I've actually worked through that whole system a couple times, because a lot of things in my life are this way. I don't know if I smoked too much weed when I was younger, and maybe it's also part of just getting old, but I feel like I've been living with this for a while, but it's actually really hard for me to retain information. Some of it just could be like a psychological barrier, which is, I mean, I think there's a recent installment in this personal journal called Memento where I talk about this, but part of my spiritual / existential psychological makeup that I'm living with here is it's very hard for me to keep traction with things. And I think a lot of it's sort of rooted in self-esteem and all that sort of stuff. But it's sort of hard for me to allow things to sort of build on each other. right? So part of that is experiences, right? Like most recently I go to Taiwan, I work on my language for about 2 months, and while things improve, the moment I get back, it's like that experience never happened. And even today I'm sitting in this space where I'm feeling like, oh, my language is deteriorating, and so to my credit, I'm trying to do things to kind of keep up with that. Like, I'm going to be linking up with a language partner through the university so I can have someone I can meet with regularly and practice my Chinese with. Also, this program that I did was a government scholarship to go to Taiwan. It's like I must have done something right in a past life because I feel blessed. But they just emailed us and were like, hey, we'll give you like 20 hours of free continued language tutoring if that's something that you want. And I was like, yes, please. Get that language study on free. But it was like, so I'm trying to do what I can to keep up with things. But the point I'm trying to make is, you do something like Centorial, where you're learning synthesis. And even though I've worked through all that, and you're going to, if you complete the whole thing, you're going to put many hours into it. And yet, it's like if I get some time away from it, it's like I tell myself I got to do the whole program all over again. It's fucking nuts. I don't know why I am that way. And when I think about it in other areas of my life, I'm also like, well, before going to school, I was absolutely steeped in Chinese philosophy, meaning I've read, every major English translation of the Analects, every major English translation of Mencius, every major English translation of the Tao Te Ching and all these sorts of things, or I Ching and all these other sorts of Chinese philosophical texts and classics and all that sort of stuff. And yet I feel like an idiot. If I'm put on the spot and asked to like articulate the meaning of this or that, I kind of feel like I don't really know what I'm talking about, And where am I going with this? I don't know. Maybe I was just saying before I went to Taiwan, I've been looking for other ways to kind of scratch a musical itch. And one of those has been making music with my computer and getting into Ableton and, not getting into a lot of software instruments and trying to make electronic dance music or something like that. But I've had Ableton, which is a recording software, for a long time. And I've had it since I was, I don't know, 16, 17. And I first got it thinking I was going to be Radiohead or something like that. Like I was going to make this kind of Bjork or Radiohead type music. And of course, the only music I ever made was just like a dude with a guitar. But that's been my recording software. I don't know why. And even this little personal journal is sort of getting recorded into Ableton right now. But I've been spending time learning those instruments, learning how to make computer music, and so again, this is just a long-winded way of saying. So Friday I didn't go to class. So what did I do? Well, I returned to synthesis in a way, and there's a software synth company called Arturia, and they have. I guess they're trying to make it like their kind of flagship synth right now. It's called Pigments. And I found an online course or a teacher who creates these sort of online educational things, and he is sort of walking people through this software synth Pigments. And I really enjoyed it. Again, I really don't see this kind of stuff building to anything. But I think because I have more time, I'm kind of just looking for excuses to do things that I'm just going to enjoy. They don't necessarily have to be, on the one hand, I see myself piling things on like, yes, find a language partner. Yes, get this free language study from the government. What else am I picking up? I feel like there was something else I was sort of thinking about recently. But as I'm getting this time, it's like, I know I'm feeling insecure about that. I actually did meet with someone. There's a coworker of mine who got some new responsibilities, and I had not yet told people that I was leaving. So there was kind of a sense in which I was kind of orienting them to their new position while also knowing that I was eventually leaving. And so very soon after they sort of settled into their job, this announcement comes out that I'm leaving my work. And, we just sort of commented on that. Like, yeah, isn't it kind of strange that we had this recent meeting and you were kind of helping me and you've known that you were leaving and that didn't come up. And I was just kind of telling them because they were asking about it. I was like, I feel a bit insecure because I've been in this job for so long that now that I'm not going to do it, I am kind of losing a big part of my identity. Like when people meet me, it's pretty cool to say that, I have this job and this is what I do. And, that was something that a big part of my identity, or even if I'm honest, some of my like confidence came from. It felt like a cool thing to tell people. And now that that's kind of disappearing, you know, I guess I feel less confident about just like sitting across from people. And if I have to introduce myself, I just say, "Oh, I'm a student." "Oh, what do you do for work?" "Oh, I don't work." That feels a little weird. And so, yeah, I guess I have this kind of insecurity about all the free time I'm sort of facing now, and um, just kind of looking to fill it with things. And of course, some of that is going to be, language study and some work stuff. But, I'm also trying to find creative things that I might enjoy. But again, that feels like something I have to like justify to other people, or not that anyone's asking me about it, but, for myself, even though no one's ever asking about it, I sort of live my life as if parts of my life are public facing or open to scrutiny that nobody really gives a shit about. But it affects how I feel. And, you know, I mean, I was talking to my brother recently and I was thinking, like, yeah, like maybe a worthwhile goal is like to just have a normal sleep schedule. Or like someone says, like, hey, what are you going to do with your free time? It's like, I don't know, maybe I'll go to bed at 10 p.m. every night instead of 2 in the morning or 3 in the morning. Maybe I'll exercise more. Um, you know, and my first impulse is to say, well, that'll give me more time to do language study or something like that. But maybe it should just give me more time to do nothing. Like maybe I should just watch more movies or do some leisure reading. So much. I mean, I have to do just an exorbitant amount of reading for all my classes all the time. And I always have this distinct thing. It's like if I go into the semester and I'm in the middle of reading something for pleasure, I just know that it's not going to get finished for like another 4 or 5 months. Excuse me. Right before I left, or towards the end of the last semester of school before the summer, I've told myself I'm going to go through all the quote encyclopedic novels. And that's something we can talk about another time if we haven't already. But these so-called encyclopedic novels that exist, and the earliest one, if you ask me, is probably the Divine Comedy, Dante's The Divine Comedy, which I've read, but wanting to reread it, right? So, I read The Divine Comedy when I was in like seventh grade, and I understood it. I mean, I understood the narrative of what was taking place, but of course, I didn't understand all the allegorical underpinnings of it. And I mean, in a way, it's kind of funny. Like I look back on when I'm younger, because I was kind of an eggheadish kind of kid who wanted to be really smart. So, I mean, I remember being in like second grade, like reading Hamlet, and actually, in a weird way, I honestly felt like, there was a period where I felt like I really understood those plays more as a kid than I did as like an adolescent or a young adult. I think back on reading Macbeth or Hamlet or any Shakespeare when I was much younger and feeling like it actually wasn't that difficult. And yet I also remember returning to a lot of that stuff in my late teens or early 20s and actually finding it really fucking difficult. I remember one time in my mid 20s just reading through the tragedies again and actually being like, yo, this is fucking weird. Like I'm sitting here as an adult and I'm having trouble just parsing or making sense of some of these sentences. And at least in my mind, that wasn't the case when I was younger. Like, is there a way, like, when you're younger, because you're less cerebral, you're actually more receptive, more able to make sense of things? Um, but what was I talking about? Yes, this is a very flighty entry. Um, why was I talking about that? I was talking about being younger, reading Shakespeare, having it be clear, feeling insecure about my time, language study. Oh Lord, who knows? How I should be spending my time. Reading for pleasure, the Divine Comedy. Okay, yeah, we're coming back to it. Yeah, I think I was just saying I was rereading the Divine Comedy. And yes, when I was younger, I was kind of a pompous kid. And so I remember actually in seventh grade, I took Latin. Actually, I need to change my story. I read the Divine Comedy when I was in eighth grade because I remember that I had 2 years of Latin when I was in middle school in seventh and eighth grade. And I don't remember a goddamn lick of it, which is really, it's one of the, I can't say the great regrets of my life. But I, it just, there's a, that studying Latin exposed me to a lot of like mythology, which was very formative and very interesting for me. And especially in my late teens and maybe 2021, when I returned to like a lot of those source texts, like the Iliad and the Odyssey, and I remember reading like Bulfinch's mythology, and I was also reading a lot of theology in general around that time. I guess I really regretted that I was just kind of fucking around in school around that time, and I didn't learn Latin, because if I had, that would have been, a window into a whole body of literature that as an adult I would really love to have access to, but I was just kind of fucking around and being stupid. But the Divine Comedy has always kind of stood out for me as one of these things that I read as a kid and I felt really proud about, and I would sort of try to talk to adults in my life about. And at the end of the day, I don't know what the hell they thought, but I I sort of imagine like there's something kind of cute and quaint about me being being an eighth grader, really taking this seriously. Like, oh, I'm reading the Divine Comedy, but of course, there's just things in it I just can't possibly understand. I actually remember this embarrassing moment when I was like, maybe this was actually in seventh grade, but like one of my I have all these chapters of my life where I've had these different favorite bands. None of them are good, or actually they're all good, but they're just kind of embarrassing. They're not like, we all had that one cute girl in middle school who like listened to Led Zeppelin and and that's cool. You know what I mean? Like, you're not going to be 40 years old and think about the time where Led Zeppelin was your favorite band and regret that. Like, that's going to be kind of cool. Whereas like me, I just have all these chapters where I understand why it's meaningful. I understand what I liked about it, but it feels like it's a hard sell for other people to think that it was cool or to think that it was anything but embarrassing. And so for me, it was like, I loved musical theater growing up, and but like my first favorite band, well, other than like I was just obsessed with Michael Jackson growing up. Bone Thugs and Harmony was like a huge group for me. Rent, the musical, was huge for me. But a major band for me was Dave Matthews Band in middle school. And for me, the window into Dave Matthews Band was their drummer, Carter Beauford. I remember watching, I was a drummer at the time. I was taking drum lessons, and my drum instructor had all these different videos, instructional videos that he had purchased, and we could kind of take them home as we wanted and just kind of watch them. And one of them was Carter Beauford's Under the Table and Drumming, which is like this, it was this 2 VHS set. I would have to take out one video at a time, but it opens up with him just drumming along to the Dave Matthews Band song Number 41, which if you can, you should click over to some streaming service and play that right now. But just from the opening of that video, I was just absolutely enamored with Carter Beauford as a drummer. And I think for like a year, Dave Matthews Band was like my favorite band, but I remember I was really taken with their cover of All Along the Watchtower at the end of their Live at Red Rock CD. And I remember that was one of the first musical moments. There were probably many in my life before that, but it still stands in my mind as one of those moments where I first heard that. And I was like, oh, I didn't know songs could hit like this. Like for me, it was alluring on so many levels. Like it was just this great piece of musical theater. Actually, wow, I'm making that connection myself right now, but it itself was a piece of musical theater. Structurally, musically, it told a story. It was almost, and it was this, I think they like closed every single fucking show that they did for like 25 years with this goddamn song. But the part that's funny, and the reason this is related to the Divine Comedy, since you're probably wondering where the fuck I'm going with this, is I remember talking about that song. Or I should say, when I first heard it, I thought it was a Dave Matthews Band song. I had no idea that it was a cover, or that it was a Bob Dylan song. And isn't it interesting that we came back to Bob Dylan, right? Funny how this stuff works out. But I remember talking with the teacher about the song, and I was like, oh yeah, this is my favorite Dave Matthews Band song. And she's like, actually, that's a Bob Dylan song. And I was like, what? And I just thought, as an adult, you have all these windows into, like, I remember one time with, well, first let me finish this one thought, which is, as an adult, you have you just have more insight than kids, and you see them kind of coming up and figuring the world out and just kind of making connections, and kind of, whether it's literature or theater or music, they kind of have to get familiar with the repertoire as well, the same way that we did, right? But it's just interesting, whether it's pretentiousness or something, is, young people are cute because they think they know a lot more than they do. And so as an adult, part of the Jedi perspective is being available and not scolding kids for that, and just letting them kind of grow and letting them think that they got everything figured out when they're playing checkers and you're playing chess on some kind of level. But I remember like sitting across from my stepmother one time, and I was like, "Oh yeah, do you know Albert Camus?" And she's like, Camus?" And I was like, "Yeah." Or what was another one? Oh, I remember like walking up to my music teacher one time, and I was trying to sort of impress them that I knew a bunch of different classical composers or whatever. And I was like, "Oh yeah, I also really like Richard Wagner." And she's like, "Oh, you mean Wagner?" And I was like, "Yeah, that's who I mean." And yeah, why is this related to the Divine Comedy? Oh, yeah, I remember just kind of talking with my 8th grade Latin teacher about the Divine Comedy, and there's nothing that stands out in my mind as much as, yeah, it's just insane to think that I was like in 8th grade walking around with this book, The Divine Comedy, reading it like I really understood what the fuck was going on, when of course I had no idea what the fuck was going on. But yeah, why are we even talking about that? Oh, I guess I was just saying, man, I just feel full fucking schizophrenic on this episode. My mind is lighting up like a goddamn pinball machine. Holy bajolies. But yeah, before I went to Taiwan, I was reading the Divine Comedy, and I read the Inferno, and I read Purgatorio, and I read 3/4 of Paradiso. And as I look at my left right now, I see this unfinished copy of Paradiso. And I guess what I'm telling myself is, now that I have all this fucking free time on my hand, maybe I should get back to that. But I guess if you end it anywhere, it's not, ending in the middle of heaven's probably not a bad place to end up. It would have been real shitty if I just stopped halfway through Inferno, right, and left us there. That's not where you want to end up. You got to at least get to Purgatory. Which, by the way, last night I watched this movie. This is spoiler alert. But I watched this horror movie called The Lodge. Now, if you want to look that up or look into that and decide for yourself if that's a movie that you want to watch, then you should not listen to what I'm about to say. Okay. But I'll just say the premise is, and it starts off kind of interesting, although it has its pretentiousness. It kind of wears its pretentiousness on its sleeve a little bit, or maybe pretentious is the wrong word. It's just kind of tropey. But what it is I was sort of thinking about this today, which is, it was not good. There was some nice things about it. The cinematography was pretty good, although it felt a little uninspired. But it was kind of one of these movies which, as soon as I finished watching it, I was just like, why didn't I like that movie? And the first thing I landed on was like, with the advent, or technology is so readily accessible, right? The tools to make movies are just more accessible now than they've ever been, right? And I think this was sort of following up on, like, I was thinking about like chess, or maybe even like poker is maybe even a better example. But like, if you were a professional poker player, like 20 years ago, or you were starting to play poker 20, 30 years ago, the only way that you could learn to play poker is to like sit down at a table and play poker. And that's, I guess, when you compare it to younger people now who are learning how to play on the computer, the difference is that, younger people develop so much faster now because they can play exponentially more hands online, So if you just think about like, they talk about 10,000 hours. I don't know, you can't really expedite 10,000 hours per se, right? But you can spend those 10,000 hours very differently, right? So if we were just in a computerless world and you were developing your poker skills, 10,000 hours of poker at a table, where the cards have to be dealt and people are kind of going to the tank or thinking, you're just going to see a lot less hands. Whereas somebody who's playing online, someone who commits 10,000 hours of playing poker online, maybe they're playing 10 tables at a time, they're just going to see so many more hands, And I guess the idea I'm sort of going toward is like their skill develops a lot faster. Yeah, there's something about like with different creative things, whether it's music. For example, I'm going deep on this Pigments software, this software synthesizer from Arturia called Pigments, right? The amount of resources that are available for me to get into that and just dive deep is just, there just weren't things like that when the mini mode came out. You just kind of had to buy it and figure it out. And at the end of the day, the truth is the vast majority of what that system was capable of doing was probably just completely lost on you because it's just no one pointed you in that direction. Right. Whereas now it's just, YouTube is just a repository of tips and tricks for anything you'd ever want to accomplish. Right. And again, where am I going with this? Oh, so I'm watching this movie and I'm thinking this is not very good. But I thought it kind of had like an air of like it was sort of like a half-baked auteurism. Like there's this kind of move now, and I think this happens in general when there's like political struggles and things like that. The genre of horror kind of comes out in a way. It's a way to sort of talk allegorically about like the horrors that we're facing. Like for example, is it Jordan Peele? I think that's the guy, right? Get Out. There's a lot of topical kind of horror movies that have come out in the last 5-6 years or something like that. Get Out to me is, even though I don't think it's a perfect movie. I'm not even sure I enjoy it that much, but I still look at it and go, oh, that is like a very topical, very important film in the genre of horror, right? Like that could go down as kind of like this generation's Night of the Living Dead or something like that. A movie that everybody saw, everybody was talking about, and is going to have important things to say about this time period 20, 30 years from now, right? But the point I'm trying to say is like horror has been seen as like a genre where aspiring auteurists can enter and make serious creative statements, right? And the best person who's done that, I think, and I hope you agree, is Ari Aster, right? Ari Aster did Hereditary, did Midsummer. They had the movie with Joaquin Phoenix that has probably come out that I don't know anything about and haven't seen, but we'll see. But there was something about this movie, The Lodge, which I was like, oh, this is like faux auteurism. Like when you just read the script, and do we need to go into details? I don't know. It's basically about a husband who separates from his wife. It sort of opens with the mom kind of with the kids, and she has custody of the kids or has them for the weekend. And you can tell something's kind of wrong with her, but she takes the kids over to the dad's house. He announces, hey, we need to finalize the divorce. I'm going to be marrying my girlfriend. She's absolutely shattered and ends up going home and like shooting herself. And so basically the premise of the film is these kids have to go live with their dad, and they have to get to know their dad's new girlfriend, who's this woman with kind of a troubled past herself. And, to kind of force this bonding experience, the dad says, hey, why don't we all go up to our family cabin that we used to spend, Christmas at all the time, and that will be a chance for us to get to know each other. And of course, some weird things start happening, and this young woman starts to believe that possibly the ghost of her boyfriend's dead ex-wife is now haunting them and all that sort of stuff. Now, what this is, though, is like before, if this movie was made in the 90s, it would just be kind of a jump scare horror movie. But because we're kind of in this time period where there are so many aspiring filmmakers, and this is, I think I'm trying to gesture to my idea that like the tools to make films are so readily available, more films are being made now than ever before. It's like it had this quality of like the script is not great. It's actually kind of tropey and cliche. And also like, but it had this thing that I think a lot of films have now, which is like, it looks really good. It's incredibly well shot. Like on a technical level, it looks good. And so I have no doubt in my mind that like a lot of people who like film might watch this and talk about this as if this is a serious film. But I was like, what is this film really missing? And I don't know how to say it as much as like when you watch a movie like Hereditary, you're in the presence of art. You know? We've talked about getting hit with the spirit, right? When you watch Hereditary or Midsummer, whether or not you think those are great films, you're in the presence of art. You get hit with the spirit, you know? And there's just something about this movie that just feels like confused. You know? Like it's all there. But like another horror example that I saw recently is Skinamarink, which is it starts out very good and actually has one of the scariest scenes I've seen in a horror movie in a long time. And it's not a jump scare. I mean, I remember when I was young and I feel like I was talking about this with somebody recently too. But like, what is the scariest movie you've ever seen? For me, it was Exorcist. I saw The Exorcist when I was like 11 and it legit fucked me up. I mean, I look back on that and I realized, I know people throw the word traumatized around a lot, but I'm just saying, I think that movie legitimately traumatized me because I remember watching it, and not only is it scary enough in its own right, but there were entire scenes where I was watching it, and I could literally feel my brain, my consciousness being expanded because I didn't know that, one, I could be that scared. So on like an emotional level, I'm feeling myself expanding, and I feel very disoriented and confused. But I'm also witnessing something. This is why I think about trauma. I'm witnessing something I didn't know could even possibly happen, right? So especially if you're a young person and you're having like a traumatic event, and we don't need to go into the specifics of what those are, I'm sure you can imagine. But if you're witnessing something that's just so confounding because you didn't know that this, I was watching a rated R movie, I'm thrust in this adult situation of content that I just didn't even know fucking existed. So obviously it was very like disorienting, but there were it wasn't just like jump scares, and there are those in The Exorcist. There were entire scenes, 5-10 minute sequences where I just felt myself absolutely on the needle of my psychological needle is peaking, and I'm just like freaking the fuck out, and I just don't even know what to do with myself, And I was like a young kid watching it with, I think my brother was there. I think our friend, we were like having a sleepover at a friend's house. So I can't be the one who like turns it off. I just remember just being absolutely transfixed watching some of those scenes, and just being just absolutely fucking shook. But anyway, this movie Skinamarink has a sequence that, it's never going to be the same because I am an adult now, right? And I'm able to know on some level that this is a movie. But it's one of the scariest scenes I've seen in a long time. And yet, the movie itself, this movie Skinamarink, is not good. It's one of these sort of aspiring auteurist films. It kind of like has, it's like, I don't know. I don't know what it's trying to be as much as it's like the Eraserhead meets Blair Witch or something like that, And it's like the concept is good, but there's no execution, The filmmaker just kind of bit off way more than they can chew. It's just, this is not a feature film. This is a short, I see this, I don't know why I'm jumping to this, but I see this in comedy specials recently. I don't want to say who it was, but I saw this comedy special on Netflix, and I was like, I think this person has a special because of their identity, because I'm watching this, and I'm thinking, this is not a professional comedian. This is somebody who I feel like they got picked out because of their identity, and Netflix wanted to give someone a special. And this person's not ready. Like, it's just they're not fully formed, and you can feel that. And, yeah, I see that with art a lot. And there was another movie that jumped to mind that I thought was a perfect example of this. I actually find this person very interesting, and I feel silly that I can't remember their name right now. I think it's like Alex Gartland or something like that. But I did have this experience where I was probably just looking for something to watch late at night. And I've had a couple of these, and I think they were kind of back-to-back. They were like horror movies. One of them is with Jake Gyllenhaal, and I think it's called Life. Yes. And it's this kind of like trapped in a spaceship kind of premise of a movie. And it's not that different, and I don't think it's I don't know if it's great, but it's like that movie watching experience, I was absolutely transfixed. And I was all in. And I thought, this is a great fucking movie. And it has an ending where you're like, holy fucking shit. And like, to me, I don't think a lot of people saw that. But that to me was like a great movie. Anyway, why am I going into that? Oh, I think I had a similar experience with this other film. It's called Annihilation. And I didn't know anything about it, and I just put it on, and I was like, I had a kind of experience, and I was like, this feels again like this kind of one step removed. Like, here's someone who's, I sense that they're kind of aspiring to auteurism, but they're just kind of falling short somewhere. And I'm confident this filmmaker has another film that if I could conjure it, it would sort of scaffold my point here. But I really felt like I was proven correct about this filmmaker when I saw I think it's their most recent film called Men, which was an A24 film, which is like where all the important films are kind of coming out on now, right? But when I saw the movie Men, it started, and the first like 20, 30 minutes, I was like hit with the fucking spirit where I was like, oh, this is a real filmmaker. Like, this is really interesting, really subtle, really, 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 really good. The filmmaker is really trusting you to kind of connect the dots, and he's not hitting you over the head with the horror. And there were so many cool things like visually and subtly, that were just actually very subtle, and I think one could have easily missed. Like, for example, I don't remember the plot as much as, I think it's about a girl who like goes away on like a creative retreat, and she goes to this small town in the middle of England or somewhere. But once she gets there, a lot of weird things start happening. But one thing that's not very obvious is that all the male actors, when she arrives there, all the male characters are played by the same actor or something like that, right? But that was not something that you're getting hit over the head with. But then there's a moment where the movie kind of fucking turns and it starts going down the rabbit hole, and it does what all super shitty, blowhardy, sort of, just bullshit art movies do, which is they just go completely nonsensical, right? Like, what's that movie that was on Netflix? I think it's called I'm Thinking of Ending Things, which actually, ironically, has the same female lead as Men, now that I'm thinking about it. But that movie, like, starts off very interesting, and then it just goes full fucking nonsense. And it's just a hateful viewing experience because you have no idea what the fuck is going on. You don't sense that the filmmaker knows what the fuck is going on. And Men turned in the exact same thing. And I was just like, how do filmmakers not know that this is like a hateful viewing experience? And some people like lose their shit over that. I mean, I guess like the closest analogy would be like David Lynch, which is like, yeah. I mean, I've actually heard there's a movie he did called Inland Empire, and Laura Dern is like the actress in that film. And she would say like no one knew what the fuck was going on. Like every day they would show up for the shoot, and he would just like hand them their pages, and nobody knew the plot of the movie, where they were at, because they're shooting out of chronological order. No one knows what the fuck is going on. And even like David Lynch really didn't know what the fuck was going on. He just trusted that he was going to find the film in the editing room, right? His movies are just kind of, they have a kind of dream logic to them. But the difference is that when you're watching a David Lynch movie, even though it doesn't make any fucking sense to you, and even if it doesn't make any goddamn sense to David Lynch, you know in your heart, in your gut, that what you're watching is a piece of art, and that it's kind of like a Bjork album, which is like, I feel like Bjork kind of lost the plot for me. Like, Vespertine, I think, was like maybe the height of their creative output. And then they did, I think, Medulla, I think, was the verbal, all vocal record. That, they kind of started to teeter for me. And then everything kind of after that, I just have no interest in. But I've never doubted for a second that Bjork is doing exactly what Bjork wants to do. And I've never doubted for a second that David Lynch is doing exactly what David Lynch wants to do. I guess what I'm trying to say is the point is, the benchmark for success is not whether or not it makes sense. Like, speaking of Bjork, she was married to Matthew Barney for a really long time. And Matthew Barney is a visual artist who's used film as a medium for a very long time. And if you sit down and watch the Matthew Barney films, the Cremaster cycle, and you're expecting films, like narrative films, you're going to be sorely disappointed. But if you just accept them as like visual art, which is like what they are, then I'm not saying you're going to enjoy them, because honestly, they're boring as hell, but you might have a better appreciation for them. But when I'm in the presence of like narrative filmmakers who lose the fucking plot. It feels clear to me that this person is not creating from a place of inspiration. It's like they're just trying to be weird for the sake of being weird. The Lodge had some of that. Annihilation had some of that as well. And in fact, as I'm thinking about it, there's two things. The two things that save shitty films, the two things that can kind of keep a shitty movie afloat from a really pretentious, like, kind of creatively bankrupt pseudo-auteurist filmmaker is cinematography and the score. Like, I really love Christopher Nolan, but like Tenet to me is like a perfect example of a film that, although it's brilliant, and I think it genuinely is brilliant, and I'm sure it all works, it is a hateful viewing experience because it is fatally fucking flawed in that it is too complex. I'm not saying that the mechanic of the film is too complex, but I'm saying Christopher Nolan made a fundamental mistake of making what transpired inside this mechanic too complex. One too many times through the fucking time machine or whatever it is. Like, Inception was very smart, although it kind of holds up less as a film because of this. But Inception, the Elliot Page character is completely there as an audience member. Every single point of the film is explained to Elliot Page so that we, the audience, understand. And of course, on repeated viewings, the film might be less enjoyable because so much of it is exposition. But Christopher Nolan understands that what's about to happen is very complicated. You're about to see a kind of a dream within a dream kind of sequence. But if you're going to sit with me for the rest of this movie, I need to make sure you understand exactly what the fuck is going on. Right? And Interstellar kind of made this mistake of kind of leaning too much into the science. There was actually not enough of a film there. And so it kind of leaned into the ideas, and those weren't really enough to kind of hold up the plot. Even though, look, if you watch Interstellar, again, it's not a perfect film, but you also realize that you're in the presence of like a tourist filmmaker, right? Tenet is the same thing. I watch it and I go, fuck, this is like a brilliant movie, and this is going to be very formative and very inspirational. And it's the type of movie that you're just going to think about and think about and think about and think about and think about. And it's a brilliant concept. But the problem is there's literally a moment even in the exposition where the woman who's supposed to be explaining things says, don't think about it too hard. And the sad part is because I bet Tenet, out of all of his movies, makes the most sense, believe it or not. I bet if you actually sat down and graphed everything out, Tenet would not only be the most complex, but I bet it all fucking works. Right? But the point is that we don't know what the fuck's going on. But the thing that really saves Tenet a lot is it's fucking beautiful visually, and the score is actually pretty fucking great too. Now, I know that our time is about to wrap up here, and I don't know where the fuck I'm going with all this, and I feel kind of weird that I'm ending on talking about a film that was not very good. But yeah, where do I fit into all this? Maybe this is a good way to kind of wrap things up. Because sometimes I just sort of talk about things, and I'm like, who gives a fuck? Like, what does that mean for me? Because it's really easy to just kind of sit here with my arms folded and think, oh, well, that's a shitty movie. What the fuck have I done? You know what I'm saying? Play armchair quarterback and kind of say, who am I to say what is or is not real art? Yeah. Then again, maybe that's just me speaking from a place of fear. Maybe I have every right to determine, right? I've spent my whole life watching movies. I should know a good movie when I see one. In fact, if I don't know that, what the fuck do I know? Anyway. Anyway, this was a very schizophrenic, scatterbrained episode. Again, I'm not really sure where we went or where we were going. But I'm committed to the process. I'm glad I put another one in the can. And I really appreciate you continuing to tune in and checking in with us. And, again, these are like messages in a bottle. I don't know where they go or who hears them, but I trust that they're finding the people that they're meant for. So, yeah. We'll put a bow on things today, and I'll look forward to connecting again next week. Until then, thank you for your time. Thank you for listening, and ciao for now.